My name is Naomi Richardson. I'm 35 years old, and for most of my life, I believed I understood love. I believed it was built slowly, carefully, through trust and shared moments. I believed that when someone chose you, when they stood in front of friends and family and promised forever, that promise meant safety. I believed love protected you. That belief died on my wedding night. But before I tell you about the moment that changed everything, you need to understand who I was before that day. Because the woman who survived does not resemble the woman who walked down the aisle. She was created in a single night. In a single realization. In the space between one breath and the next. Before Derek, my life was predictable in the best way. I was a corporate event planner in Atlanta, Georgia. Organized. Disciplined. Independent. I worked long hours, built my reputation from nothing, and took pride in being the person companies trusted with their biggest moments. Product launches. Charity galas. Executive retreats. When something had to be perfect, they called me. Love was never my priority. Not because I didn't want it, but because I refused to settle. I watched friends rush into relationships just to avoid being alone. I watched marriages fall apart quietly, painfully. I promised myself that if I ever committed, it would be because it felt right, not because I was afraid of time passing. I was content with my life. Busy, fulfilled, and certain that if love came, it would have to meet me where I stood, not pull me away from myself. Then I met Derek Thompson. It happened at a charity gala I had organized for a medical technology firm. 500 guests. Black tie. Controlled chaos. I was moving through the ballroom with my clipboard, mentally checking timelines, when I felt someone step into my space. He apologized immediately. Polite. Calm. He smiled like he was genuinely embarrassed. We started talking. Just small talk at first. He asked about the event. Not in a shallow way, he asked real questions. About logistics. About planning. About how long it took to organize something like this. Most men pretended to be interested. Derek actually listened. He told me he worked in insurance. Risk assessment. Policies. Numbers. He joked that my job created chaos while his job prepared for it. I laughed. Something about him felt grounded. Safe. We talked for nearly an hour. I didn't even notice the time. When he finally asked for my number, it felt natural. Not forced. Not rushed. Our first date was simple. Dinner at a quiet restaurant. No pressure. No show. He remembered things I had mentioned in passing. My favorite wine. My dislike for loud places. He asked about my childhood. About my parents. About what I wanted in 10 years, not just 5. Over the next 2 years, Derek became part of my routine. Morning texts. Late night calls. Weekend trips. He never raised his voice. Never disappeared. Never made me doubt where I stood. When my workload became overwhelming, he cooked dinner. When I doubted myself, he reassured me. Looking back, I understand how carefully that trust was built. He met my parents within 6 months. My mother adored him instantly. My father, cautious by nature, took longer. But even he admitted Derek seemed dependable. My younger brother tested him constantly, sarcasm, questions, subtle challenges. Derek passed every one. There were no obvious red flags. No dramatic fights. No secretive behavior that I noticed. If anything, Derek was consistent to the point of comfort. When he proposed on a quiet beach in Charleston, just the two of us, I didn't hesitate. He told me he'd never been more certain of anything in his life. He slipped a vintage ring onto my finger, said it had belonged to his grandmother. It felt symbolic, meaningful, permanent. I said yes. We planned the wedding over 18 months. I wanted elegance, not excess. A historic estate outside Atlanta. White roses. Soft lighting. A string quartet. I obsessed over details because that was who I was, someone who believed preparation guaranteed success. Derek let me take the lead. He trusted my vision. He said all he cared about was marrying me. The morning of the wedding, I woke before sunrise in the bridal suite. The stillness felt sacred. My dress hung near the window, glowing softly in the early light. I touched the fabric and thought this was the moment every choice had led to. The ceremony was flawless. Derek stood at the altar with tears in his eyes. At the time, I thought they were tears of love. Now I wonder what else they might have been. The reception began as the sun dipped below the trees. Music. Laughter. Clinking glasses. Nothing felt wrong. Not yet. If I could warn her, the woman I was, I would say this: danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it holds your hand. And sometimes, it waits until the exact moment you feel safest to strike. The reception settled into its rhythm as the evening deepened. Music floated through the estate grounds, soft at first, then louder as people loosened up. Laughter echoed from every corner. My dress felt heavier with every step, but I didn't care. This was the night people tell you you'll remember forever. At the time, I thought that was a beautiful thing. Derek stayed close to me at first. His hand rested at the small of my back as we moved from table to table, thanking guests for coming, accepting compliments, smiling for photos. He kept calling me, my wife, like he was testing the sound of it, letting it roll off his tongue. Every time he said it, I smiled wider. Looking back now, I realize how carefully he managed that first hour. How present he seemed. How attentive. Almost like he was playing a role that required perfect timing. After dinner was served and plates were cleared, the atmosphere shifted. The band picked up the tempo. Guests crowded the dance floor. I danced with my father, then with my brother, then with friends I hadn't seen in years. Derek drifted away occasionally, always returning with a drink in hand, always placing one in mine before I could ask. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Champagne flowed freely at weddings. That was normal. Expected. But somewhere between the second dance and the third toast, something subtle changed. Derek started watching me instead of dancing with me. Not in a loving way. Not in the way a groom looks at his bride with pride or affection. His eyes tracked me, followed my movements across the room, lingered too long when I laughed with someone else. When our eyes met, he smiled instantly, like he'd been caught staring. I brushed it off. Nerves, I told myself. Weddings were overwhelming. He'd been drinking. Anyone would be on edge. At around 8:15 p.m., my maid of honor pulled me aside. She needed help fixing a loose strap on her dress. We slipped into the powder room just off the main hall. I remember glancing at my phone while she adjusted the fabric. No missed calls, no messages, nothing unusual. We were gone for maybe 5 minutes. No more. When we stepped back into the reception hall, the noise hit us again. Music, laughter, movement everywhere. I scanned the room instinctively, looking for Derek. That's when I saw him. He was standing near the champagne table along the far wall. The area was momentarily empty. Derek stood with his back half turned to the room, his shoulders tense. Something about his posture made me slow down. I watched as he glanced over his shoulder. Once. Twice. Then he reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. My first thought was that he was checking his phone. Instead, he pulled out a small vial. Glass. Clear. No label. I stopped walking. The room seemed to narrow, everything else fading slightly out of focus. My maid of honor kept talking beside me, unaware, but I couldn't hear her anymore. Derek uncorked the vial with practiced ease and tilted it over a single champagne flute. My flute. I knew it instantly because of the way it was positioned, slightly apart from the others, angled just the way I always left it. The liquid disappeared into the pale gold champagne. Derek swirled the glass gently, slipped the empty vial back into his pocket, and straightened his jacket. He exhaled. It wasn't relief. It wasn't nerves. It was satisfaction. My heart began to pound. My hands went cold. My legs felt weak. I searched for explanations. Innocent ones. A prank. A surprise. Some dramatic gesture. But every instinct screamed no. Why hide it? Why wait until I was gone? Why only my glass? I didn't confront him. Somewhere deep inside, a voice warned me that reacting too quickly could be dangerous. So I smiled. I walked toward him like nothing was wrong. When he saw me, his face shifted instantly. The tension vanished, replaced by warmth. He opened his arms, and I stepped into them, my cheek against his chest, my heart racing against his steady breathing. You disappeared, he said lightly. Bathroom line, I replied. My voice sounded normal. I reached past him and picked up both champagne flutes. This was the moment that saved my life. I examined them briefly, then handed him the one he had prepared for me. He took it without hesitation. Without looking. The band quieted as the best man tapped his glass to begin the toasts. Derek raised his flute high. I raised mine just enough to look convincing. As the speeches began, I watched him from the corner of my eye. He took a long sip. Then another. I barely touched mine. Seconds passed. Then a minute. His smile faltered. His brow furrowed. He blinked hard. His grip tightened. He looked at me, confused. I leaned in close. Wrong glass, I whispered. The color drained from his face. His eyes widened in pure, unfiltered fear. He tried to speak. Nothing came out. The glass slipped from his fingers and shattered. At first, people laughed. Then Derek collapsed. His body hit the floor hard. His limbs jerked violently. His breathing turned shallow and uneven. Screams filled the room. I dropped to my knees, my wedding dress pooling on the floor, and shouted for someone to call 911. My voice cut through the chaos. Controlled. Clear. Paramedics arrived. Police followed. As Derek was loaded onto a stretcher, I stood up slowly. My fear hardened into clarity. While everyone watched him convulse, I reached into his jacket pocket. My fingers closed around the glass vial. That night, my wedding reception became a crime scene. And my marriage ended before it ever truly began. The ambulance doors slammed shut, and with that sound, the illusion of my wedding night finally shattered. Red and blue lights washed over the estate, turning white flowers into something harsh and unreal. Guests stood in clusters, whispering, crying, staring at me like I was no longer a bride but a question they didn't know how to ask. I rode to the hospital alone. No one offered to come with me. No one knew whether they should. Derek was no longer my husband in their minds, but he wasn't yet a criminal either. He was suspended somewhere in between, and so was I. At the hospital, everything smelled like antiseptic and urgency. Doctors rushed Derek into the emergency room while a police officer gently guided me to a quiet waiting area. He asked me simple questions at first. My name. My age. How long I'd known my husband. His voice was calm and professional, but his eyes never left my face. I handed him the vial. I told him exactly what I'd seen. Where Derek was standing. What he poured. How long I was gone. How I switched the glasses. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't soften anything. I spoke slowly, clearly, because I needed him to understand this wasn't confusion or hysteria. This was fact. When I finished, the officer nodded once and stood up. He didn't reassure me. He didn't tell me everything would be okay. He said, "We need to treat this as a potential attempted homicide." Those words landed heavier than any accusation ever could. Hours passed. Nurses came and went. A detective introduced himself, Detective Martinez. He was older, careful with his expressions, the kind of man who had seen too much to react quickly to anything. He told me Derek was alive, but barely. The substance in his system was powerful. Fast-acting. Dangerous. He asked again if Derek had any medical conditions I knew about. I shook my head. Any history of drug use? No. Any reason someone would want to harm him? I laughed, a short, hollow sound that surprised even me. Only himself, I said. That was when Detective Martinez studied me differently, not as a grieving wife, but as someone who might be telling the truth. They took my phone. My purse. My statement. They swabbed my champagne glass and the shattered remains of Derek's. They photographed my dress. They asked if I felt safe going home. I didn't know how to answer that. By morning, the toxicology report came back. The substance Derek ingested was a combination of rohypnol and a powerful sedative. The dosage was not accidental. It was measured. Calculated. Enough to slow breathing, induce unconsciousness, and, if untreated, cause death. Detective Martinez sat across from me when he told me. If you had consumed this, he said, you likely wouldn't have woken up. I stared at my hands. Still wearing my wedding ring. He continued, based on the evidence and your statement, your husband will be arrested as soon as he's medically stable. Arrested. Husband. Those two words should never exist together. Derek regained consciousness later that afternoon. When they told him he was under arrest, he asked for a lawyer immediately. He didn't ask about me. He didn't ask what had happened. That hurt more than I expected. The investigation moved faster than my emotions could keep up with. They searched our home, our computers, our finances. The truth surfaced quickly. Detective Martinez called me in 2 days later. Derek was drowning in debt, gambling, loans under different names, credit cards I didn't know existed. 6 months before our wedding, he had taken out a life insurance policy in my name. $750,000. Forged signatures. Digital trails he thought no one would follow. There were messages too. Texts between Derek and a woman named Allison. A coworker. Married. Discreet. Calculating. They didn't speak like lovers. They spoke like partners. Messages about timing. About the wedding. About how everyone would assume it was alcohol. About how no one questions accidents on wedding nights. One message made me physically sick. She won't feel a thing. The arrest became public. Headlines spread. Friends called. Some avoided me entirely. The trial lasted 8 months. I testified. I told the jury everything. I looked Derek in the eye when I spoke. He never looked back. His defense tried to paint me as unstable, emotional, mistaken. Then the evidence spoke for itself. Guilty on all counts. Derek was sentenced to 25 years in prison. As they led him away, he finally looked at me. There was no apology. Only regret that he had failed. It took me a long time to understand that was not my burden to carry. After the verdict, people expected closure. They assumed that once Derek was sentenced and taken away, life would reset itself, like justice had neatly tied a bow around the trauma. That's not how it works. Not when the person who tried to end your life was the same person you trusted with it. The days after the trial felt strangely quiet. Too quiet. The phone calls slowed. The news cycle moved on. And suddenly, I was alone with the aftermath. Alone with memories that didn't fade just because a judge had spoken. I moved out of the house we had shared. I couldn't sleep there anymore. Every room felt contaminated, like the walls remembered conversations I could never forget. I packed only what I needed and left the rest behind, furniture, gifts, wedding photos still sealed in boxes. I wanted distance, not reminders. For a while, I stayed with my parents. My mother hovered carefully, watching me like I might shatter if she looked away too long. My father didn't ask questions. He fixed things around the house, stayed busy, spoke only when necessary. That was his way of loving me. Sleep didn't come easily. When it did, it never stayed. I woke up gasping, heart racing, replaying the vial, the glass, Derek's face when I whispered those words. Sometimes I woke convinced it had all been a nightmare, that I would roll over and find him beside me, breathing peacefully. Then reality would crash back in. I started therapy 3 weeks after the trial. At first, I hated it. Sitting in a quiet room, being asked how I felt useless. How do you explain betrayal that rewires your brain? How do you describe realizing your life was nearly reduced to a payout and a headline? Slowly, something shifted. My therapist didn't focus on Derek. She focused on me. On the instincts that saved my life. On the moment I noticed something was wrong and acted despite fear. She reminded me again and again that survival wasn't luck. It was awareness. That idea stayed with me. The public reaction was harder than I expected. Most people were kind, supportive. But there were others, strangers who questioned my story, who asked why I hadn't noticed sooner, who said it sounded too convenient. As if surviving made me suspicious. I learned not to read comments. Not to search my name. Not to measure healing by other people's opinions. Work became my anchor. I returned to event planning slowly. Smaller projects. Intimate gatherings. Corporate meetings where alcohol wasn't the focus, where champagne flutes didn't trigger memories I wasn't ready to face. There were moments my hands shook. Moments the clink of glass sent my heart racing. Moments I had to step outside just to breathe. I stopped judging myself for it. Healing isn't linear. It doesn't follow rules. 1 year after the wedding that nearly ended my life, I stood in a ballroom again. Different city. Different purpose. I watched people celebrate and, for the first time, I didn't feel afraid. I felt strong. I began speaking privately with women's groups. Small rooms. Quiet conversations. I didn't tell them to fear love or distrust everyone. I told them to trust themselves. I told them danger doesn't always look dangerous. Sometimes it looks like consistency. Sometimes kindness. Sometimes someone who remembers your favorite wine. And I told them instincts are not paranoia. They are data. Dating again wasn't something I rushed into. For a long time, vulnerability felt reckless. I built walls so high even I couldn't see over them. But walls are lonely places to live. Eventually, I allowed small steps. Coffee. Conversations. Boundaries clearly defined. I learned to speak up when something felt off instead of explaining it away. I learned that discomfort is information, not inconvenience. I didn't fall in love again right away. But I learned to trust myself again. 2 years after the trial, I returned to the estate where my wedding took place. Not to relive it. Not to punish myself. But to reclaim it. I stood where my life had nearly ended and felt something unexpected. Peace. What happened there no longer owned me. Derek remains in prison. Occasionally, updates come through legal channels. I don't read into them. His story ended the moment mine began again. I keep the vial locked away. Not as a trophy. Not as a reminder of him. But as proof of myself, proof that awareness, even in terror, can save a life. People ask if I hate him. I don't. Hate requires energy. Space. Attention. He doesn't get that anymore. What I feel instead is clarity, about the love I deserve, the kind that doesn't demand silence or confusion. The most dangerous moment isn't when something goes wrong. It's when something feels wrong and you convince yourself it isn't. I listened. And I'm still here. Time changes the way memories live inside you. They don't disappear, but they stop screaming. They settle into quiet corners of your mind, waiting for moments when you're strong enough to look at them without flinching. For a long time, I avoided those corners. I told myself survival was enough. That moving forward without looking back was the goal. But healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means understanding. There came a moment, years after that night, when I realized my story wasn't just about what nearly happened to me. It was about what did happen inside me. The shift. The awakening. The understanding that love without awareness is not safety, it's vulnerability without protection. I used to think strength looked loud. Confident. Unbreakable. Now I know real strength is quiet. It's the voice inside you that whispers when something feels wrong, even when everything around you says it shouldn't. Especially then. People still ask me how I knew. How I found the courage to switch the glasses. The truth is, I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified. My hands were shaking. My heart was racing. But fear didn't stop me, it sharpened me. Instinct doesn't shout. It nudges. And too often, we're taught to ignore that nudge. To be polite. To avoid making a scene. To trust appearances over feelings. I almost paid for that conditioning with my life. There are moments now when I catch myself standing at a celebration, holding a drink, listening to laughter, and I feel a flicker of that old fear. I don't fight it. I acknowledge it. Then I remind myself that fear doesn't control me anymore. Awareness does. My life today looks different than the one I imagined before my wedding. But different doesn't mean worse. In many ways, it's more honest. I wake up every morning knowing my survival wasn't an accident. It was a choice. A split-second decision made by a woman who trusted herself more than the image of the man standing beside her. That knowledge has changed how I move through the world. I ask more questions. I rush less. I listen more, not just to others, but to myself. Love, for me now, is not about intensity or promises. It's about consistency without control. Transparency without fear. A sense of safety that doesn't require explanation. I don't believe everyone is dangerous. I don't believe love is a lie. But I do believe blind trust is. Trust should be built, not assumed. If you're listening to this and something in your life feels off, a relationship, a situation, a person, know this, you don't need proof to protect yourself. Discomfort is enough. Confusion is enough. That quiet, persistent unease is enough. You don't owe anyone access to you at the cost of your safety. For a long time, I struggled with guilt. Guilt that Derek survived. Guilt that I didn't see the signs earlier. Guilt that my instincts kicked in when they did and not sooner. Therapy taught me something crucial. Responsibility belongs to the person who chose harm. Not the person who survived it. I didn't create his debt. I didn't write those messages. I didn't plan my own death. I simply refused to drink from the glass he prepared for me. That refusal saved my life. Some nights, I think about how close I came to becoming a story someone else told. A headline. A warning. A tragedy explained away with words like unexpected and unfortunate. Instead, I get to tell it myself. I get to stand in my truth, not as a victim, but as a witness. To my own strength. My own awareness. My own survival. My name is Naomi Richardson. I am 35 years old. I am alive. And if my story stays with you, let it be for this reason. Pay attention. Ask questions. Trust yourself, even when it's uncomfortable. Because sometimes, the most dangerous thing in the room isn't the stranger you fear. It's the person who knows you best. And hopes you never notice.